My name is Benno Lindenberg. I was born May 14, 1920 in Dortmund, Germany. And I'm 93 years old. In May, I'm gonna be 94. I was in the 3rd grade of Hindenburg Realgymnasium when Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933 in Germany. I was the only Jewish boy in a class of 40. And he appointed immediately Baldur von Schirach as the head of the Hitlerjugend, and every Hitlerjugend boy, age 10, had to join the Hitlerjugend. They came to classes with the brown shirts, swastikas on their arm, and a shoulder belt, and a knife dangling from their belts. And we had to meet every morning in the courtyard, and in goose steps we marched to our classrooms. While we were marching, they had a song that was prescribed by the Baldur von Schirach. I'm gonna say it in German and then translate in English. Wenn das Judenblut vom Messer spritzt, dann geht es uns noch mal so gut. Which translates, when Jewish blood is dripping from our knives, our life will be much better. Now you can imagine 39 of the boys in that classroom were friends of mine for the last 7 years. I was persona grata. I was the goalie in their soccer team. I was the fastest sprinter in the 100-meter dash. And all of a sudden, all my friends want to kill me. When blood is dripping from our knives, their life will be much better. Naturally, I came running home to my dad, and I told my dad what's happening. The school teacher, who wasn't a Nazi yet, he was still the old school teacher from before. He told me, Benno, don't come to class no more, because I am not gonna be responsible for your well-being. I don't know what one of those crazy kids can do. Naturally, I went home to my dad, cried, and my father said, don't worry, I have the same situation in my business. My father owned a little factory, and the German stormtrooper took over, and they said, the Jews are out, we are in. So he was preparing something, and he said, let's wait for your bar mitzvah. I was 5 months away from my bar mitzvah, which was May 14, 1933. The most cultivated people in the world at that time, the biggest scientist, the biggest musician, everything, all of a sudden everybody turned into an animal. The reason that they trained all those kids from age 10 to become a Hitlerjugend, they had to brainwash them, because Hitler in Mein Kampf wrote while he was in prison that he wants to exterminate all the Jews all over the world. But in order to have that, he needed murderers. And the murderers were daily taught so to become, at age 18 or 19, they were ready to be guards in concentration camp and kill anybody. But you have to realize too that besides killing 6 million Jews, Hitler also killed 5 million non-Jews. For instance, every child that had cerebral palsy or was mentally handicapped were put in institutions, and slowly by slowly they killed those people. So in all together there were 11 million people killed during his reign. I had 2 uncles that were married to non-Jewish women in Dortmund, in Germany, and even the relatives stayed away from us, because this was such a dramatic happening in Germany, because everybody thought this Hitler is just a fantasy, this cannot happen. He's gonna last like every other government a few months and we're gonna have, but no, they infiltrated themselves in everything. They created the SA, the Sturmabteilung, and SS stormtroopers, and they created only murderers to execute all the people that were against them. They put them in concentration camp. Not only Jews, but if somebody was against the German government, he was arrested too. The first thing I saw, because we lived in Midtown Dortmund, my father was fortunately very well-to-do, and we had a beautiful 8-room apartment overlooking the marketplace. One day, I look out of my window in my bedroom, and I see in the middle of the marketplace a fire, a tremendous fire. They were burning all the books written by Jewish writers. They were burning all the Torahs from the synagogues that they grabbed. They were burning everything that was against the German Reich. And it was like a band fire, and people were dancing around it. That's what I saw as a 13-year-old. My bar mitzvah, in every Jewish boy's life at that time, when the parents were financially able to create a big business, a big party, it was created. My parents had prepared a unbelievable great party. All our friends, all our relatives, all my friends, my personal friends were invited. Naturally, all this had to be canceled. We snuck into the synagogue in Beck, and I was called up to the reading the Torah, which is every bar mitzvah boy has to, in order to make that transition from a boy to a man. I read my portion, and we snuck out again, and we lived approximately 5 blocks away from the synagogue, one of the most beautiful bottom buildings in Dortmund, which were totally destroyed during Kristallnacht. And we went back home. We had some wine with some sponge cake, and that was my party. And unfortunately, that was my bar mitzvah, but that was my entry to manhood. At that time, my father had organized that we, the 2 boys, should be sent to Hamburg to stay with a non-Jewish aunt till they smuggled themselves over the border into Belgium, because my youngest uncle was living in Liège, and he was also a very well-to-do man. He had a big factory in woolens, and so my father organized that they put us on a train and sent us to Hamburg, and they smuggled themselves in. We left our apartment, my 8-room apartment, every piece of furniture, the factory, everything was left over. The only thing we had was in 1924, my grandmother came to stay with us. My grandmother was Brooklyn born, American born. And, but unfortunately my grandfather, who got married in the United States, didn't like the United States. He took my grandmother back to Poland, where he died in 1924, and my father had to go to Poland, pick up his mother to stay with us. My grandmother only spoke English and Yiddish. So at age 6, my brother and I, we were both fluent in English. In August 1933, finally my parents were set up in Belgium. They had rented an apartment, and they wanted us to come to Belgium. But this was the difficulties. How are we gonna get there? So they tried to recruit some woman that had 2 sons the same age, because in those days, children below 16 didn't have passports. So she figured she's gonna send somebody to Hamburg to pick us up. Couldn't find anybody. My aunt in Hamburg was trying to do the same thing, couldn't find anybody, because everybody was afraid that if they get caught, they were sent to a concentration camp. So me, as a 13-year-old strong guy, a man now, I said, don't worry, buy me a ticket for a railroad ticket for Liège, and we are going by ourselves. Before we left, she tutored us what we have to say if we get to the border. And finally, we took the train, we went to Cologne. In Cologne, I had to take the international train that came from Warsaw to Paris, but it stopped also on the border in Belgium and in Liège and in Brussels, and went straight to Paris. We got there. When we got to the border, the custom inspectors came. He says, where are your parents? I said, we were lying, those 2. We were dressed up like in lederhosen We looked like two little Hitler boys. And we said, my parents had a telephone call that my grandmother was very sick, and they had to take the night train, and they didn't want to wake us, so they said, you take the day train and we meet there. And fortunately, he swallowed it and he believed us. He said, you don't have anything to declare. I know, my suitcase is up there. So half an hour later, we were in Liège, Belgium. My mother waited at the railroad station, and we were reunited again.